You don't have to break before you become blessed. You don't have to drown before you discover the shore. You don't have to fight every battle alone to prove your strength. Somewhere along the journey of life, many people learn to survive instead of learning to surrender. They learn how to grind, push, force, hustle, and strain, but they forgot how to trust, release, and rest in God. The struggle became normal. The pressure became familiar. The anxiety became daily. And without realizing it, the heart began to believe a lie. If I don't carry everything myself, nothing will work. But the truth is this: the struggle you're carrying may not be proof of strength. It may be proof of resistance. Resistance to letting God lead. Resistance to trusting his timing. Resistance to releasing control. Many people are exhausted, not because life is hard, but because they are trying to do God's job. Many people spend their lives believing that constant struggle is proof of strength, maturity, or responsibility. They wear exhaustion like a badge of honor and treat stress as if it is the price of success. The busier they are, the more valuable they feel. The harder they push, the more convinced they become that they are doing the right thing. But deep inside, their soul is tired, their mind is restless, and their peace is fragile. What they often don't realize is that not all struggle comes from growth. Some struggle comes from resistance. Resistance to trusting God, resistance to surrendering control, and resistance to letting divine wisdom lead instead of human effort. When you resist God's direction, life becomes heavier than it needs to be. You may still move forward, but every step feels forced. Decisions feel stressful instead of guided. The heart remains anxious even when progress is visible. You may achieve things externally while internally feeling empty, tense, and uncertain. That tension is often not caused by the difficulty of the assignment, but by the refusal to release control. You are trying to carry what God never asked you to carry. You are trying to manage outcomes that only divine wisdom can shape. You are trying to protect yourself from uncertainty when faith was designed to walk through it. Resistance disguises itself as responsibility. It whispers that if you don't handle everything yourself, everything will fall apart. It convinces you that letting go means being careless, lazy, or weak. But the truth is, resistance does not make you stronger. It slowly drains your spiritual energy. It creates a constant state of pressure inside your mind. It keeps you alert, tense, and overthinking. It robs you of rest, clarity, and joy. You may still function, but you are no longer flourishing. You may still move, but you are no longer aligned. True strength is not found in how much pressure you can tolerate. True strength is found in how deeply you can trust. Strength is not controlling every variable. Strength is believing that God is reminding even when you cannot see the outcome. Strength is not forcing doors open. Strength is waiting for the right doors to open at the right time. Strength is not proving your independence. Strength is living in healthy dependence on God. When a person resists surrender, they often create unnecessary battles. They fight situations that require patience. They rush decisions that need prayer. They overreact to delays that are designed for preparation. They panic over uncertainty instead of trusting divine timing. The soul becomes exhausted, not because the journey is too long, but because the heart is constantly pushing against the flow of God's guidance. It is like swimming upstream when the current is meant to carry you forward. You spend energy fighting the direction instead of being carried by it. Resistance also breeds fear. When you believe everything depends on you, the weight becomes overwhelming. Every mistake feels catastrophic. Every delay feels threatening. Every challenge feels personal. But when you allow God to lead, fear begins to loosen its grip. You recognize that you are not the source of your provision, your protection, or your purpose. You become a participant in God's plan instead of the architect of your own survival. Peace begins to replace pressure because your confidence shifts from your ability to God's faithfulness. Many people confuse spiritual maturity with self-reliance. They believe that growing in faith means becoming more independent, more capable, more in control. In reality, spiritual maturity produces deeper trust, softer surrender, and greater humility. The more you grow, the more you realize how much you need God. The more you mature, the more you learn to release what you cannot control. The stronger your faith becomes, the less you feel the need to force outcomes. You begin to recognize that surrender is not weakness. It is alignment. Resistance keeps you tense because you are constantly bracing for impact. Surrender allows you to breathe because you trust the one who is leading. Resistance keeps you calculating worst-case scenarios. Surrender keeps you anchored in hope. Resistance keeps your mind restless. Surrender calms your spirit. Resistance keeps you reacting. Surrender keeps you responding with wisdom. When you finally release resistance, something powerful happens inside you. Your heart becomes lighter. Your thoughts become clearer. Your prayers become deeper. Your decisions become calmer. You stop rushing life and start walking with God. You stop measuring your worth by productivity and start resting in identity. You stop striving for control and start trusting divine order. Life does not become problem-free when you surrender, but it becomes peace-filled. Challenges still come, but they no longer dominate your emotions. Uncertainty still exists, but it no longer controls your confidence. Delays still happen, but they no longer produce panic. You begin to understand that God is working even when you cannot see immediate results. You learn to trust the unseen process. The greatest freedom comes when you stop fighting what God is trying to teach you. The struggle that once strained you begins to dissolve because you are no longer resisting growth. You become teachable instead of defensive, patient instead of anxious, peaceful instead of pressured. Your strength no longer comes from how hard you push. It comes from how deeply you trust. When resistance fades, alignment begins. When alignment begins, peace follows. And when peace fills your heart, you realize that the struggle was never meant to define you. It was meant to teach you to trust. Many people live with a silent belief that carrying heavy emotional, mental, and spiritual weight is simply part of being responsible. They wake up already burdened by worries, expectations, unfinished plans, and future fears. They move through the day managing pressure like it is normal, convincing themselves that this is what adulthood, leadership, faith, and maturity look like. But this mindset slowly drains joy, clarity, and peace. God never designed the human heart and mind to carry unlimited weight. You were never meant to carry life alone. You were created to walk in partnership with God, not in isolation from Him. There is a difference between responsibility and burden. Responsibility is what you are called to manage faithfully. Your character, your obedience, your effort, your choices, your love, and your integrity. Burden, however, is the weight of outcomes, timing, control, and future security. Those things belong to God. When you carry what belongs to God, pressure builds inside your soul. Anxiety becomes constant. Sleep becomes restless. The mind keeps spinning with what-if scenarios. The heart remains tense even during moments of success. This is not strength. This is overload. Human strength has limits. Your emotional capacity has limits. Your mental focus has limits. Your physical endurance has limits. But God's strength does not operate within human limitations. His wisdom sees what you cannot. His timing aligns what you cannot predict. His power sustains what you cannot maintain. When you attempt to live as if you are self-sufficient, you place supernatural expectations on natural capacity. Eventually, something inside begins to crack. Peace, joy, motivation, health, or faith. Many people unknowingly replace trust with control. They believe that if they stay worried, alert, stressed, and busy, they are being responsible. But worry does not solve problems. It only multiplies fear. Stress does not create solutions. It clouds judgment. Overthinking does not produce clarity. It produces confusion. God never asked you to carry tomorrow's worries today. He never asked you to carry the weight of every possible outcome. He asked you to trust Him daily. When a person truly allows God to carry the burden, something changes internally before anything changes externally. The heart softens. The mind slows down. The nervous tension begins to loosen. Decisions feel less rushed and more grounded. Fear loses its authority. Faith becomes active rather than theoretical. You begin to understand that your life is not held together by your effort alone, but by God's faithfulness. Carrying everything alone creates spiritual isolation. Even if you pray, your soul still feels responsible for fixing everything. You may talk to God, but deep inside you still believe the final pressure rests on your shoulders. This creates hidden exhaustion. You may smile publicly while feeling internally depleted. You may appear strong while quietly burning out. God never intended for you to live in constant survival mode. He intended you to live from peace, trust, and divine guidance. letting God carry the burdens does not mean avoiding responsibility or effort. It means releasing the pressure of control. You still act wisely, work diligently, and make responsible choices, but you do so without the heavy emotional weight of needing everything to turn out perfectly. You learn to do your part and trust God with his part. This balance restores peace. When you stop carrying everything alone, you also begin to experience freedom from comparison and performance pressure. You stop measuring your worth by results. You stop chasing validation. You stop competing with timelines that were never assigned to you. You begin to value obedience over applause and faithfulness over speed. This produces deep inner stability. Many people don't realize how heavy their burden has become until they finally lay it down. They have lived so long in stress that peace feels unfamiliar. They've lived so long in tension that rest feels uncomfortable. But slowly, as trust grows, the heart relearns how to breathe. The soul relearns how to rest. The mind relearns how to hope without fear. When you carry burdens alone, every setback feels personal. Every delay feels like failure. Every obstacle feels threatening. But when God carries the burden, setbacks become lessons. Delays become preparation. And obstacles become opportunities for faith. You stop interpreting life through fear and start interpreting it through trust. Allowing God to help you also strengthens humility. You acknowledge that you do not have all the answers. You admit that you cannot control every outcome. You accept that some things require patience rather than pressure. This humility does not weaken you. It strengthens your spiritual maturity and emotional stability. Peace is not the absence of problems. It is the presence of trust. Even when circumstances remain challenging, your internal state becomes steady. You are no longer ruled by panic or desperation. You remain anchored because you know God is actively working beyond what you can see. When you finally release the burden into God's hands, you discover that life becomes lighter, not because everything is easy, but because you are no longer carrying what was never yours to carry. Your faith deepens, your clarity sharpens, your joy slowly returns, your strength renews itself. You were never designed to live overwhelmed. You were designed to live supported, guided, protected, and strengthened by God. The moment you stop trying to hold everything together alone is the moment you begin to experience the peace that comes from divine partnership. Many people grow up believing that strength means never needing help, never showing weakness, and never letting go of control. They learn to protect themselves by staying guarded, independent, and self-reliant. Over time, this mindset seeps into their spiritual life. They may believe in God, pray regularly, and attend religious gatherings, yet deep inside, they still carry the pressure of managing everything alone. Surrender feels uncomfortable because it challenges the illusion of control. But true faith is not about how tightly you can hold your life together. It is about how fully you can place it in God's hands. Surrender is often misunderstood. Some think it means giving up, becoming passive, or losing ambition. Others fear that if they surrender, their dreams will disappear or their identity will weaken. But surrender does not destroy purpose. It refines it. Surrender does not remove responsibility. It redirects dependence. Surrender does not eliminate action. It aligns action with divine wisdom. It simply means trusting God enough to let him lead instead of insisting on your own way. The courage required to surrender is greater than the courage required to struggle. Anyone can push through pain with stubborn determination. Anyone can stay busy and distracted to avoid facing fear. But it takes spiritual maturity to release control and outcomes are uncertain. It takes humility to admit that your understanding is limited. It takes faith to move forward without needing every answer in advance. Surrender is not weakness. It is the strength of trusting God beyond your comfort zone. When you surrender, you acknowledge that God sees what you cannot see. He understands the consequences you cannot predict. He knows the timing you cannot calculate. He protects you from dangers you cannot recognize. By surrendering, you are not losing power. You are aligning with a greater power. You are allowing divine wisdom to shape your decisions instead of relying solely on human reasoning. One of the reasons surrender feels difficult is because it requires releasing familiar patterns. Even stress can become familiar. Even anxiety can feel normal. Even struggle can feel safe because it is predictable. Letting go of these patterns feels like stepping into unknown territory. But growth always happens outside the comfort of familiarity. Faith is not built by staying in control. It is built by trusting beyond what feels safe. Surrender also confronts pride. Pride whispers that you must prove yourself, protect yourself, and secure your future by your own strength. Faith responds that God is your protector, provider, and guide. Pride resists dependence. Faith embraces dependence as wisdom. When pride leads, pressure increases. When faith leads, peace increases. A surrendered heart is not lazy or careless. It is attentive, obedient, and responsive. Instead of rushing into decisions driven by fear or pressure, a surrendered heart waits for clarity. Instead of forcing outcomes, it listens for guidance. Instead of reacting emotionally, it responds thoughtfully. This posture brings stability and wisdom into daily life. Surrender also reshapes how you handle uncertainty. Instead of panicking when plans change or doors close, you begin to trust that redirection may be protection or preparation. You learn that not every delay is denial and not every obstacle is defeat. Some interruptions are divine invitations to grow, adjust, or mature. Surrender gives you the emotional flexibility to navigate change with peace rather than fear. When surrender becomes a lifestyle, inner peace becomes deeper. You no longer feel responsible for controlling every detail. You stop living in constant tension. Your thoughts become less frantic. Your heart becomes less guarded. You begin to enjoy the present instead of constantly worrying about the future. This peace is not dependent on perfect circumstances. It flows from trust in God's leadership. Surrender also strengthens relationships. When you are not driven by control, you become more patient, understanding, and compassionate. You stop trying to manipulate outcomes or people. You learn to communicate honestly and listen deeply. You release the pressure of trying to fix everyone and everything. This creates healthier emotional boundaries and deeper connection. Spiritual growth accelerates when surrender becomes consistent. You become more sensitive to God's guidance. You recognize his voice more clearly. You develop discernment. You grow in humility. You mature emotionally and spiritually. Your faith becomes practical, not just theoretical. Surrender does not mean the absence of challenges. Life will still present tests, disappointments, and uncertainties, but your posture toward those challenges changes. Instead of reacting with fear, you respond with trust. Instead of striving, you cooperate with God's process. Instead of resisting, you align. There is a quiet confidence that emerges when surrender becomes natural. You no longer need to prove your worth through achievement or approval. You are secure in your identity. You know you are guided, protected, and supported. This confidence is steady, not fragile. It is rooted in faith, not performance. The more you surrender, the more you realize that God's ways often surpass your understanding, but never fail his purpose. What you once tried to control begins to unfold with greater clarity and peace. Your journey becomes less chaotic and more meaningful. Your faith becomes less anxious and more anchored. Surrender is not a one-time decision. It is a daily posture. Each day invites a fresh choice to trust rather than control, to release rather than grasp, to follow rather than force. And each time you choose surrender, your spiritual strength deepens. You become more resilient, more peaceful, more aligned, and more confident in God's guidance. True strength is not found in holding tightly to everything. It is found in trusting God enough to let go. Many people believe that peace comes after problems disappear, after prayers are answered, after circumstances improve, and after life finally becomes predictable. They tell themselves, once this situation changes, I will rest. Once this breakthrough happens, I will feel calm. Once this door opens, I will finally have peace. But this way of thinking keeps the heart trapped in constant waiting and tension. Peace becomes a reward instead of a foundation. In reality, peace does not wait for breakthrough. Peace prepares the way for breakthrough. Trusting God does not remove every challenge immediately, but it transforms the way your heart responds long before external change arrives. When a person truly begins to trust God, the first thing that shifts is not the situation, it is the soul. The mind slows down. The constant mental noise of worry begins to quiet. Fear loosens its grip. The heart becomes steady instead of reactive. This internal calm becomes the evidence that alignment has begun. Peace is not weakness. It is spiritual confidence. It is the inner assurance that God is in control even when outcomes remain unclear. Trust replaces panic with patience. Instead of rushing into decisions driven by fear, you begin to wait with wisdom. Instead of reacting emotionally to every obstacle, you respond thoughtfully. Instead of overthinking worst-case scenarios, you anchor your thoughts in hope. This does not mean you ignore reality. It means you interpret reality through faith rather than fear. Peace becomes a compass that guides your choices. When you move in alignment with God, there is an inner steadiness even when the path is challenging. When you move outside of alignment, there is often internal unrest, even if the opportunity looks attractive. Learning to recognize this inner peace allows you to navigate life with greater clarity and confidence. It becomes a spiritual signal that helps you discern direction. Breakthrough often begins invisibly. While you may be waiting for visible change, new opportunities, healed relationships, financial improvement, or answered prayers, God may first be working internally, strengthening your character, deepening your trust, and stabilizing your emotions. These invisible changes prepare you to sustain the blessing when it arrives. Without inner peace, external success can become overwhelming, confusing, or destructive. Peace builds the foundation necessary for lasting growth. When you trust God, you also release the need to control timelines. Anxiety often comes from trying to force outcomes prematurely. Trust teaches patience. You learn to value preparation over speed. You recognize that delay does not mean denial. You begin to see waiting as a season of strengthening rather than punishment. This mindset protects your heart from frustration and disappointment. Peace also brings emotional resilience. Life will still present uncertainty, conflict, and unexpected challenges, but instead of collapsing emotionally or becoming overwhelmed, you remain anchored. You learn how to stay steady under pressure. You become less reactive and more reflective. This resilience allows you to navigate difficulty with wisdom rather than panic. Many people search for peace in distractions, entertainment, success, relationships, or approval. These sources provide temporary comfort but cannot stabilize the soul. True peace flows from trust in God's presence, guidance, and sovereignty. When your security is rooted in something eternal, temporary instability loses its power over you. Trusting God also reshapes your perspective on problems. Instead of seeing obstacles as threats, you begin to see them as opportunities for growth and faith. Instead of interpreting hardship as abandonment, you recognize it as development. This shift in perspective reduces emotional stress and increases spiritual maturity. Peace creates space for gratitude. When the heart is no longer consumed by worry, it becomes more aware of blessings. You notice progress instead of only problems. You appreciate small victories. You recognize God's faithfulness in everyday moments. Gratitude strengthens joy and reinforces trust. When peace leads, your relationships improve. You communicate more patiently. You listen more deeply. You respond instead of react. You become less defensive and more understanding. This emotional stability strengthens connections and reduces conflict. Peace also sharpens discernment. A calm mind processes information more clearly. You become better at recognizing healthy opportunities versus unhealthy ones. You avoid impulsive decisions. You learn to wait for clarity instead of rushing into regret. Breakthrough that arrives without peace often creates new stress rather than joy. Promotion without peace creates pressure. Success without peace creates emptiness. Growth without peace creates instability. But when peace comes first, breakthrough becomes sustainable. You are emotionally prepared to handle expansion, responsibility, and opportunity. Trust also deepens spiritual intimacy. When you stop striving and start trusting, prayer becomes less about begging and more about connection. Worship becomes more sincere. Faith becomes more relational rather than transactional. You begin to enjoy God's presence rather than only seeking his solutions. Peace does not mean the absence of effort or responsibility. It means the absence of panic, fear-driven pressure, and restless striving. You still work, plan, and act wisely, but from a grounded heart rather than an anxious one. As trust grows, peace becomes your natural state instead of a temporary feeling. You learn how to return to calm even when life becomes loud. You become less controlled by circumstances and more anchored in faith. This inner stability becomes a testimony to others, demonstrating the power of trust in action. When peace arrives before breakthrough, it confirms that alignment has occurred. The heart is no longer fighting God's process. The soul is no longer resisting divine timing. The mind is no longer dominated by fear. You are positioned to receive whatever comes next with wisdom, gratitude, and strength. Peace is not the destination, it is the pathway. When you trust God, peace walks ahead of your breakthrough, preparing the ground for lasting transformation. Many people assume that struggle automatically means progress. They believe that if life feels hard, complicated, or exhausting, then something meaningful must be happening. While growth can certainly involve discomfort, not every struggle is productive. Sometimes struggle is not a sign of advancement, but a signal of misalignment. When your actions, decisions, and mindset drift away from God's direction, tension increases internally. The soul begins to resist the flow of divine guidance, and life starts to feel heavier than it needs to be. Misalignment often shows itself through constant frustration, confusion, and emotional fatigue. You may feel like you're always pushing but never arriving, working but never resting, striving but never settling. You may feel busy yet unfulfilled, active yet restless. This inner tension is not always caused by external circumstances. Sometimes it is the heart's quiet warning that something is out of sync spiritually. When your will is not aligned with God's will, peace begins to fade, even if success appears visible on the surface. One of the most subtle dangers of misalignment is the illusion of productivity. You may be accomplishing goals, making money, building influence, or gaining recognition, yet inside you feel disconnected, dry, or uneasy. External success can sometimes mask internal drift. Without alignment, even good achievements can feel empty. The heart longs for meaning, not just ion. When a person moves ahead of God instead of walking with him, unnecessary battles arise. Decisions become rushed instead of prayerful. Opportunities become confusing instead of clear. Relationships become strained instead of peaceful. The mind becomes restless instead of focused. You may find yourself constantly correcting mistakes that could have been avoided through patience and discernment. This creates a cycle of stress that drains spiritual energy. Misalignment can also manifest as resistance to stillness. Silence feels uncomfortable. Waiting feels frustrating. Slowing down feels threatening. The need to constantly stay busy often hides fear of listening deeply. When the soul avoids stillness, it often misses gentle correction, guidance, and clarity that God provides in quiet moments. When alignment is restored, peace returns even before circumstances change. You may still face challenges, but the internal conflict fades. There is clarity instead of confusion, direction instead of chaos, and steadiness instead of pressure. Alignment produces rest in the soul because you are no longer fighting against divine flow. Walking with God does not mean a problem-free life. It means a guided life. Challenges still come, but they feel purposeful rather than pointless. Delays feel protective rather than frustrating. Doors that close feel instructional rather than defeating. The heart becomes more receptive instead of reactive. Misalignment often begins subtly. It may start with small compromises, neglected spiritual habits, ignored convictions, or rushed decisions. Over time, these small deviations create larger emotional and spiritual strain. The soul gradually loses sensitivity to peace and clarity. This is why regular reflection, prayer, and humility are essential for maintaining alignment. When alignment is present, decisions feel grounded rather than rushed. You are not driven by fear, competition, or pressure. You move with wisdom, patience, and discernment. Your actions flow naturally instead of forcefully. This reduces stress and increases confidence. Alignment also influences emotional health. Anxiety decreases, overthinking slows, emotional reactions soften. You become more resilient to stress because your inner foundation is stable. Your sense of identity becomes rooted in purpose rather than performance. Many people resist alignment because it requires adjustment. It may require letting go of certain habits, relationships, ambitions, or timelines. Change can feel uncomfortable, but it often leads to greater peace and clarity. Growth always involves realignment. When you are aligned with God, your priorities shift. You begin to value obedience over speed, faithfulness over recognition, and peace over pressure. You become less reactive to external validation and more anchored in inner conviction. Alignment also enhances your ability to hear God's guidance. Spiritual sensitivity increases. You become more aware of inner nudges, warnings, and confirmations. This helps you avoid unnecessary mistakes and recognize healthy opportunities. Struggle that comes from alignment often feels purposeful and strengthening. Struggle that comes from misalignment feels draining and confusing. Learning to discern the difference helps you respond wisely rather than blindly pushing forward. When you sense persistent unrest, it may be an invitation to pause and realign. Instead of pushing harder, you step back and seek clarity. Instead of forcing movement, you wait for direction. This humility protects your peace. Alignment does not mean perfection. It means responsiveness. It means staying flexible and teachable. It means adjusting when correction comes. It means listening when wisdom speaks. As alignment deepens, trust grows. You no longer feel the need to control every detail. You become comfortable with uncertainty because you trust God's leadership. This brings emotional freedom. The soul was designed to function best in alignment with its Creator. When alignment is restored, life flows with greater ease, clarity, and peace. The struggle that once drained you begins to lose its grip because you are no longer fighting against divine direction. You are walking with it. Many people struggle not because they lack faith, but because they lack patience with timing. They believe in God's promises, yet they feel restless when those promises do not unfold as quickly as they desire. The human heart naturally wants immediate results, quick answers, and visible progress. Waiting feels uncomfortable because it exposes uncertainty and tests trust. But divine timing operates on wisdom that stretches beyond human understanding. God's timing cannot be rushed, manipulated, or pressured. What is meant for you will arrive when you are prepared to receive it, not simply when you desire it. When people try to speed up God's process, they often create unnecessary stress and disappointment. They force decisions, rush relationships, chase opportunities prematurely, and push themselves into seasons they are not ready to sustain. What looks like progress on the outside can become pressure on the inside. Rushing creates shortcuts that often bypass character development, emotional maturity, and spiritual readiness. Without preparation, even good opportunities can become overwhelming. Waiting is not wasted time. It is active preparation. During waiting seasons, God strengthens your patience, clarifies your priorities, deepens your humility, and builds emotional resilience. These internal changes are essential for sustaining future blessings. Many blessings fail to bring joy because the heart was not ready to steward them wisely. Timing protects both the blessing and the person receiving it. Impatience often reveals hidden fear, fear of missing out, fear of being left behind, fear of loss, fear of failure. These fears pressure the heart to act prematurely. But faith invites calm confidence. Faith trusts that what belongs to you will not pass you by. Faith believes that delays are not denial, but divine protection and preparation. Rushing God's timing can also distort discernment. When emotions dominate decisions, clarity becomes blurred. You may mistake excitement for confirmation or pressure for opportunity. Slowing down allows wisdom to surface. Waiting sharpens discernment and prevents regret. God's timing aligns with growth, not just achievement. He cares more about who you are becoming than what you are accomplishing. Character development often takes longer than skill development. Emotional maturity often takes longer than visible success. Spiritual depth often grows slowly and quietly. These internal foundations determine how well you sustain future responsibility and influence. When you learn to trust God's timing, anxiety begins to lose control. You no longer feel the need to compete with others' timelines. You stop comparing your journey. You learn to honor your season. This creates peace and emotional stability. Waiting teaches surrender. It trains the heart to release control. It develops humility. It teaches obedience even when progress feels slow. These qualities strengthen faith and spiritual maturity. Many people quit too early because they misinterpret delay as failure. They abandon seeds that were still growing underground. Growth often happens invisibly before it becomes visible. Trust keeps you consistent even when results are not immediate. God's tie. Ming also protects you from unnecessary pain. Some doors that seem attractive today may lead to harm tomorrow. Some relationships that feel exciting now may not be healthy long-term. Some opportunities that promise quick success may create long-term stress. Waiting allows God to redirect you gently rather than through painful consequences. Trusting timing also teaches gratitude. Instead of focusing on what has not yet arrived, you learn to appreciate what is already present. Gratitude strengthens contentment and reduces frustration. When the appointed time arrives, things often unfold with less resistance. Doors open naturally, resources align, support appears, clarity increases, peace confirms direction. What once required effort suddenly flows with grace. Rushing may produce temporary gains, but long-term instability. Waiting produces lasting fruit. Faith that waits builds endurance and wisdom. God's timing is not slow. It is precise. It considers every detail, your emotional readiness, relational health, spiritual maturity, and environmental alignment. Nothing is random. Nothing is forgotten. Trust grows strongest in waiting seasons. When you continue to believe without visible confirmation, your faith deepens. Your dependence on God strengthens. Your spiritual confidence matures. Patience is not passive. It is active trust. You continue doing what is right, remaining faithful, growing, learning, and preparing. You are not stagnant. You are becoming as you learn. To rest in divine timing, pressure fades. You stop forcing outcomes. You stop measuring progress by speed. You start measuring progress by growth. What is meant for you cannot be taken by someone else. What God has planned cannot be missed when you walk in obedience. Timing ensures alignment between opportunity and readiness. The heart that trusts timing experiences peace even while waiting. This peace protects joy, strengthens endurance, and stabilizes faith. When the moment arrives, you will recognize that the waiting was shaping you for what you prayed for. The delay was building strength. The process was preparing capacity. Trusting God's timing transforms waiting into wisdom and patience into power. Letting go is one of the hardest things for the human heart because control feels like safety. When you believe you are managing everything, you feel protected from uncertainty, disappointment, and failure. But this sense of control is often an illusion. No matter how carefully you plan, life still carries unpredictability. Holding tightly to control may create temporary comfort, but over time it increases anxiety, tension, and exhaustion. True freedom begins when you release what you were never meant to carry and allow God's power to operate beyond your limitations. When you let go, you are not abandoning responsibility. You are surrendering ownership of outcomes. You still act wisely, work faithfully, and make thoughtful choices, but you no longer carry the emotion, weight of needing everything to turn out exactly as planned. This shift removes pressure from the soul. The mind becomes calmer. The heart becomes lighter. The spirit becomes more receptive to guidance. Control often blocks clarity because fear dominates decision-making. When you are anxious, your thoughts race, your emotions cloud judgment, and your perspective narrows. Releasing control allows your nervous system to settle and your thoughts to stabilize. In this calmer state, wisdom becomes easier to recognize. You begin to hear God's direction more clearly because your internal noise quiets. Letting go also invites divine strength. When you stop relying solely on your own ability, you create space for God's power to operate. Human effort has limits, but divine power does not. Surrender aligns you with resources, wisdom, and opportunities that cannot be accessed through self-effort alone. You begin to see doors open naturally instead of being forced. Growth accelerates when resistance decreases. Resistance delays transformation because it keeps the heart guarded and tense. When you release resistance, learning becomes easier. Correction becomes easier to accept. Change becomes less threatening. This openness allows God to shape your character more effectively. Letting go also heals emotional patterns. Many people cling to control because of past pain, disappointment, or betrayal. Control feels like protection from being hurt again. But healing requires trust. When you gradually release control, you allow God to restore emotional safety internally. Fear loosens its grip. The heart learns to relax again. Direction becomes clearer when you're not forcing outcomes. Instead of rushing ahead driven by anxiety, you wait for confirmation and peace. This reduces mistakes and regret. You move with confidence rather than desperation. Letting go also improves relationships. Control creates tension expectations, and disappointment. Releasing control allows healthier boundaries, better communication, and deeper trust. You stop trying to manage people's behavior and start honoring their growth process. When you release control, you also free yourself from comparison and competition. You stop measuring progress against others. You honor your own journey and timing. This reduces insecurity and increases gratitude. Letting go strengthens humility. You recognize that you are not the ultimate authority over your life. You acknowledge your dependence on God. This humility creates emotional balance and spiritual maturity. Peace increases as control decreases. The nervous system relaxes. Sleep improves. Thoughts become less obsessive. Emotional reactions soften. This peace becomes a stabilizing force in daily life. Letting go does not eliminate responsibility. It transforms motivation. Instead of acting from fear, you act from faith. Instead of striving, you cooperate. Instead of forcing, you follow. When you let go, creativity and insight often incur ease. A relaxed mind solves problems more effectively than a stressed one. You become more open to new ideas and better solutions. Trust deepens as you see God working beyond your effort. Small confirmations build confidence. Faith becomes experiential rather than theoretical. Letting go also strengthens patience. You become comfortable with gradual progress. You appreciate growth rather than demanding instant results. Releasing control builds resilience. You learn to adapt rather than panic when plans change. You remain flexible instead of rigid. Letting go allows you to live more fully in the present. Anxiety pulls attention into the future. Regret pulls attention into the past. Surrender anchors you in the now. When resistance fades, alignment strengthens. When alignment strengthens, clarity increases. When clarity increases, peace stabilizes. Letting go invites God's wisdom, strength, and direction into every area of life. The more you release control, the more you experience freedom, stability, and growth. Transformation does not come from tighter grip. It comes from open hands. Many people spend their lives chasing change through effort alone. They push harder, plan more, hustle longer, and stretch themselves thinner, hoping that one more push will finally create the breakthrough they desire. Effort has value, discipline has purpose, and diligence matters, but effort by itself cannot transform the heart or align destiny. Real breakthrough does not begin with more striving. It begins with deeper trust. When trust becomes the foundation of your life, effort becomes balanced, peace becomes stable, and progress becomes sustainable. Trust shifts the center of control from human ability to divine guidance. Instead of believing that everything depends on your strength, intelligence, or speed, you begin to rely on God's wisdom and timing. This releases the pressure to perform perfectly. You are no longer driven by fear of failure or the need to prove yourself. You act faithfully, not frantically. Effort driven by anxiety creates burnout. Effort driven by trust creates endurance. When fear motivates your actions, your nervous system stays tense, your mind overworks, and your emotions fluctuate wildly. But when trust leads, the body relaxes, the mind stabilizes, and the heart remains anchored. You can work hard without being overwhelmed. Trust also changes how you respond to setbacks. Instead of interpreting obstacles as failure, you see them as redirection, growth, or preparati. On. You remain hopeful rather than discouraged. You learn from mistakes instead of being defined by them. Breakthrough rooted in trust is lasting. Breakthrough rooted only in effort often collapses under pressure. Without inner stability, external success creates new stress. Trust builds emotional capacity to sustain growth. Trust simplifies decision-making. You no longer chase every opportunity or panic over every delay. You wait for peace and clarity. You learn to say no without guilt and yes with confidence. Trust reduces comparison. You stop measuring your life against others' timelines. You honor your unique journey. This frees emotional energy and increases gratitude. Trust strengthens identity. You no longer define yourself by achievements or approval. You become secure in who you are, not just what you do. Trust deepens spiritual connection. Prayer becomes relationship rather than transaction. Faith becomes lived experience rather than theory. Trust reshapes goals. You pursue purpose rather than pressure. You seek alignment rather than applause. Trust increases patience. You become comfortable with gradual progress. You appreciate growth over speed. Trust enhances clarity. A calm mind discerns wisdom more easily than a stressed one. Trust improves resilience. You adapt rather than panic when change occurs. Trust releases peace before visible change arrives. This peace stabilizes emotions and strengthens faith. Trust allows you to enjoy the present instead of constantly waiting for the future. Trust creates healthy balance between action and rest. Trust invites divine partnership into every decision. Trust transforms struggle into growth. Trust unlocks courage to move forward without certainty. Trust reduces fear of failure. Trust increases gratitude. Trust deepens humility. Trust builds confidence. Trust sustains joy. When trust becomes your foundation, effort becomes effective instead of exhausting. You still work diligently, but without pressure. You still plan wisely, but without panic. You still pursue growth, but without obsession. The heart learns to rest while moving forward. The mind learns to focus without fear. The soul learns to hope without anxiety. Breakthrough begins internally before it manifests externally. Peace arrives before progress. Alignment happens before expansion. The life you desire is not built by force. It is formed by faith.